Welcome back to the Truthful Fake channel. If you find this analysis informative, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. We just witnessed the farce held at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, where President Trump and Vladimir Putin met behind closed doors for 2.5 hours and reached an undisclosed understanding. This meeting, ostensibly about the ongoing war in Ukraine started by Russia, was a coup for Putin and broke his international isolation. Breaking with decorum, Putin joined Trump in blaming Biden for Russia's invasion. The Russian president also warned European countries not to torpedo the nascent progress. Most notably, an upbeat Putin signaled that the two had discussed a reset in bilateral relations, saying, "I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions." While the left is outraged by what they see as Donald Trump's naivete or outright stupidity, many of Trump's faithful repeat the line that U.S. policy under Biden somehow forced Russia to invade its neighbor, and fully expect Ukraine to surrender and Europe to compromise its security because, as Trump said, Russia's a very big power. The much-talked-about pivot to China that was used to explain Trump's irrational deference to Putin has for now been forgotten by both sides, and so has the Epstein cover-up, which is politically significant not so much because of the crimes committed by powerful pedophiles, but because it threatened to expose what was likely a vast honeypot intelligence operation run by Israel that affected the foreign policy of the United States and other countries. Our analysis suggests that Trump's aims at the Anchorage meeting were different from those publicly discussed, and that an agreement was already reached before the two leaders met. In this episode, we're going to examine evidence that President Trump's seemingly naive or erratic foreign policy isn't naive or erratic at all, but purposeful, and the purpose is obfuscated because it is harmful to the interests of the United States. We suggest that there is indeed a logical explanation for Trump's actions, and it reflects the goals of an influential group of his major donors and prominent supporters. This explanation has little to do with the war in Ukraine or the challenges posed by China. Instead, the dominant driving goal of the second Trump administration is to reshape the Middle East and to support the creation of Greater Israel, while eliminating the Palestinian problem once and for all. Putin's cooperation is important to making this goal achievable, and we will argue that it is the most likely reason for Trump's otherwise bizarre behavior toward the Russian strongman. Let's start by first examining Trump's allegiance to the Greater Israel vision, and then discuss how his sycophantic behavior toward Putin serves to achieve it. Since January, despite all the America First and pivot to China rhetoric, the single overarching foreign policy trend in Trump's second presidency appears to be the steering of U.S. foreign policy toward the Middle East and clearing the way, through both diplomatic and military means, for the expansion of the Israeli state and the forceful expulsion of the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. Trump, as arguably the most overtly pro-Israel president in history, beating out Lyndon Johnson for that title, is the champion of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Zionist lobby, and many apocalyptic evangelicals who seek to establish an ethnically pure Greater Israel. The definition of Greater Israel differs among proponents and audiences, but it potentially encompasses not just current Israeli territory, Gaza and the West Bank, but also all of Sinai and parts of the territory of most neighboring countries. Greater Israel has deep political roots, going back to Theodore Herzl and many of the early Zionists, and more recently to strategic documents like Oded Yinon's A Strategy for Israel from the 1980s and A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. The latter was an influential 1996 policy document prepared for then-Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Among its authors were Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, and David Wurmser, who later held key positions in the George W. Bush administration, and were instrumental in shaping U.S. policies in the Middle East, including pushing the U.S. to invade Iraq and destabilize the region for Israel's benefit. The Zionist proponents of Greater Israel fully understand that their goals are not reachable through Israeli power alone, without the full backing of a superpower. This is why they have focused all of their efforts on electing and cultivating sympathetic politicians in the United States. They have largely achieved almost full control over Congress, and now under the second Trump administration, we're seeing Netanyahu's and AIPAC's political goals clearly prioritized through geopolitical deals, economic coercion, and domestic suppression, often directly contradicting U.S. geopolitical interests. Benjamin Netanyahu was, predictably, the first foreign leader hosted by Trump in his second term. During their press conference on February 4th, Trump rather proudly reiterated the statements he made in front of AIPAC in 2024. Trump said, "We moved the embassy to Jerusalem, recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel, and got the Abraham Accords done. Nobody thought that was possible." Trump was correct in pointing out that during his first term, he over-delivered on the demands from staunch Zionists and pro-Israel donors like Miriam and Sheldon Adelson, and pushed through American policies that directly serve Benjamin Netanyahu's and AIPAC's greater Israel goals. All of the items Trump listed were at the top of the Zionist lobby's priorities. While Trump was lauded by the media in the U.S. for pushing through the Abraham Accords, which normalized Israel's ties with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, many saw them as a ploy to splinter and weaken Arab resolve for the creation of a Palestinian state. The Palestinians saw their statehood aspirations sidelined, and this arguably led to the October 7th attack on Israel, which aimed to galvanize the Arab street and prevent the abandonment of the Palestinian cause by the wealthy Arab states. Since the start of his second term, President Trump has continued to advance the same pro-Zionist policies and is setting the pieces to achieve the ultimate goal of eliminating the Palestinian problem and expanding Israel's borders to include the occupied territories. Both Trump and Netanyahu realize that there are significant opposing forces, chief among them Iran and its main backer, Russia, which still has a formidable presence in the Middle East. This is the most likely explanation for Trump's sometimes bizarre wooing behavior toward Putin. First, let's discuss Gaza and the West Bank, because this is where the greater Israel strategy is most apparent. On January 14th, Trump claimed credit for a Qatari-led ceasefire ending Israel's 15-month campaign, which Gaza's health ministry said killed over 47,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians. But that ceasefire was just the opening move. On May 14th, Middle East I revealed details of a mega deal from the Gulf state talks. This plan proposes a decade-long Gaza reconstruction ostensibly under an Arab-American committee and includes Israeli-demanded full Hamas disarmament, its leader's exile, and most notably, the setting up of what they referred to as temporary housing camps, with provisions for leaving Gaza. That's diplomatic language for ethnic cleansing. This wasn't a new proposal. Back in October 2024, Calculist revealed an Israeli Ministry of Intelligence document advocating voluntary resettlement of Gazans. Trump himself echoed this in Oval Office remarks on February 10, 2025, when he suggested Palestinians would find better housing outside Gaza. Most shocking of all, Trump said the United States will take over the Gaza Strip, while the Palestinians who live there should leave. Trump and a grinning Netanyahu also talked about relocating Palestinians and leveling Gaza, which he suggested could be the Riviera of the Middle East under U.S. ownership. These provisions, thinly masked as humanitarian aid, appear designed to expel the Palestinians, most likely to Egypt. They align with and pave the way for Israeli nationalist plans for ethnic cleansing and annexation of internationally recognized Palestinian territories, like the goals set forth in Bezalel Smotric's 2017 Decisive Plan Manifesto, which at the time was supported by 82% of Jewish Israelis. The Trump administration and much of Congress appear to support it wholeheartedly, even though it clearly violates international law prohibiting such forced civilian transfers. Of course, Egypt doesn't want this, and neither do the other hapless neighbors of the Israeli state. They're resisting any such population transfer, fearing both the perception of complicity in ethnic cleansing and the domestic unrest and demographic changes that would follow. But Israel, shielded by the Trump administration, is pushing ahead with its land grab as it realizes that the opening provided by Trump for the creation of a greater Israel may not come again in a generation. With America's tacit approval, Israel is currently executing a two-pronged strategy to ensure once and for all that no Palestinian state will prevent the establishment of Greater Israel. Advancing its annexation goals, at the end of May Israel announced the legalization of 12 illegal settlement outposts, and the construction of 22 new settlements spread across the West Bank. This marked the largest expansion since the Oslo Accords. Then on August 5th, the Israelis paraded U.S. evangelical leaders, a key Trump base, and U.S. officials who included Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, Mike Huckabee, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Governor of Arkansas, who visited the illegal settlements to push West Bank annexation, citing biblical prophecies for Greater Israel. Shortly thereafter, on August 14th, Israel revived the long-frozen E1 project, adding 3,400 housing units between East Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim, designed to sever East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank, preventing any territorial contiguity for a future Palestinian state. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich declared it would bury the idea of a Palestinian state. The evangelicals and Republicans were promptly followed by a 25-strong Democratic delegation also organized by the American Israel Education Foundation, an AIPAC affiliate, and led by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. While Zionist interests have succeeded in co-opting the United States into doing the dirty work necessary to achieve a greater Israel, including the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Russia remains a major player in the region, and Putin continues to provide support for regional opponents of Israel's ambitions. Russia is Iran's closest great power partner, and it has deepened relations since 2022, collaborating on drone and missile development, sharing air defense and electronic defense technologies, and investing almost $3 billion in Iran's defense and transport sectors in 2023 alone. Russia also tacitly supports Hezbollah, coordinates with the group in Syria, and uses diplomatic pressure to legitimize them in Lebanon. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov is the key liaison with Hamas, and Hamas leaders visit regularly, while Russia provides diplomatic cover for Hamas at the UN. Reportedly, Russia has also established a military base and deployed military advisors in Houthi-controlled Yemen and has arms, including Yakan anti-ship missiles. In Syria, Russia still has a considerable military presence, with a large airbase in Latakia and a naval base in Tartus. In Egypt, Russia and the U.S. are almost equal suppliers to Egypt's defense, and Russia is a growing alternative to U.S. technology export controls. Russia's state firm Rosatom is building Egypt's first nuclear power plant at El Daba, with the fourth reactor underway as of January 2025. Plans are advancing for a Russian industrial zone near the Suez Canal, and Egypt is well underway to aligning with Russian-driven economic blocs, such as BRICS and the Eurasian Economic Union. This makes it clear that without Russia's acquiescence, the Greater Israel vision will be difficult to achieve. Trump and Netanyahu are well aware of this, and it appears that Trump is willing to sacrifice Ukraine, our allies, and broader U.S. interests to gain Putin's cooperation. Upon taking office, Trump promptly suspended military aid to Ukraine. Even though the U.S. is technically not participating in the Ukrainian defense, he is repeatedly offering Ukrainian territory and the lifting of U.S. sanctions to Putin. As already noted, Trump's seemingly buffoonish overtures toward Putin are universally dismissed as ignorance or incompetence by analysts. But this analysis assumes that neither Trump nor those around him are stupid or ignorant. And this is supported by the fact that Trump has already delivered on the Zionist Greater Israel wish list, including recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel, breaking the Iran nuclear deal, and pushing through the Abraham Accords aimed at isolating the Palestinians. All this leads us to assert the much more plausible and simple explanation that Trump's foreign policy is centered on achieving an expanded Greater Israel, and he needs Putin's assistance, or at least cooperation, to ram through the plan to end any possibility of a Palestinian state and enable Israel to take over Gaza and the West Bank. Trump is willing to use America's might and to place the United States as a shield for Israel against any local or world resistance. This is why Trump is persistent in allowing Putin to continue Russia's aggression. This is why he is offering Putin sanctions reprieve and trade deals, and this is why he is offering Putin territorial gains. At the same time, ramping up to the Alaska meeting, Trump threatened to resume weapons supplies to Ukraine and impose further sanctions against Russia's trading partners, notably India, presumably to incentivize Putin to make concessions. Russia has already signaled that it may play ball. Back on March 4th, Trump asked Putin during a phone call to facilitate U.S.-Iran talks on Iran's nuclear program and its proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, all threats and key obstacles to Israeli expansion. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said at the time that Russia is ready to do everything in its power to mediate. The Straits Times confirmed that U.S. and Russian officials, including Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, discussed this in Riyadh on February 18th, with Lavrov briefing Iran's Abbas Araghchi. Then on April 7th, Trump announced direct talks with Iran and appointed Steve Witkoff as envoy, which may have been a ruse coordinated with Israel. On June 13th, Israel launched surprise attacks on Iran, and on June 22nd, following Trump's order, the U.S. launched strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. While Trump and Israel hailed the coordinated strikes as a great victory, they resulted in Iran's suspension of IAEA cooperation and an Iranian demand for compensation and conditions for future talks. But until the latest meeting, to Trump's obvious disappointment, Putin's escalation in Ukraine suggested limited cooperation in response to Trump's overtures and threats. Putin understands that Trump and Netanyahu have a limited time window, and if he's going to cooperate, he'll extract the maximum benefit he can. It's likely that Putin was satisfied after meeting Trump on August 15th, and we will all be watching for signs of further expansion, consolidation, and entrenchment by Israel and Iranian, but most importantly Russian, responses. If these are at all favorable to Israel, we can expect unilateral actions by Trump on Russian sanctions reprieve and likely trade cooperation with Russia. Over the next days and weeks, we expect that Trump will pressure Ukraine and the Europeans to settle for a peace agreement largely on Russia's terms. It seems clear who are the winners and losers here. Israel stands to benefit the most if Trump helps it achieve its expansionist goals. Putin stands to declare victory if Trump allows Russia to keep the Ukrainian territories it has occupied. But the losers will be the United States and its standing as a superpower and a beacon of Western democracy, and the American-led world order that has ensured relative peace for the past 7 decades. The problem for Trump and the Israel First contingent in the administration and Congress is that American public opinion has turned against Israel because of what many, especially younger voters, see as genocide in Gaza. This has caused the greater Israel proponents to view the second Trump term as their last chance to achieve their goal, at least in the foreseeable future. To prevent domestic opposition to what may be seen by some as a treasonous foreign policy, Trump has imposed a regime of suppression and censorship against criticisms of Israel's actions, especially on campuses. This is particularly ironic, because Trump likely owes his election to voters reacting against the authoritarian left's persecution of opponents of its woke agenda that reached its peak during the Biden presidency. Now, the Trump administration is using similar methods, but on an even grander scale, to quash criticism of a foreign country. To give just a few examples, in April, Trump's team pushed Columbia University into a consent decree tying $400 million in federal funding to enforcing anti-Semitism guidelines. Then in May, Columbia arrested 80 students after a Butler library occupation, with 33 banned and 65 suspended. Individual cases tell the story. Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian-Syrian student at Columbia, was detained March 8th and faced deportation for anti-Israel protests, despite no criminal charges. Yunseo Chung, a 21-year-old Columbia student and lawful resident, faces deportation after a misdemeanor arrest at a Barnard sit-in. Even American citizens aren't immune. Eden Deckerhoff was suspended from Florida State University for speaking against Israel at a commencement ceremony. The Trump administration is using broad economic coercion to prevent criticism of Israel. In April, DHS announced FEMA grants worth $1.9 billion that required states to certify non-participation in Israeli boycotts. After widespread outcry, DHS reversed this policy on August 4th, with spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin stating, FEMA grants remain governed by existing law and policy and not political litmus tests. Similarly, following backlash from scientists and free speech advocates, including many on the right, NIH rescinded a similar anti-BDS policy in August. But the legal framework remains. Executive Order 14149, signed by Trump on January 30th, redefined anti-Israel speech as politically motivated conduct. Executive Order 14188, issued February 5, targets criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. The persecution extends to diplomats too. South African Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool was expelled for criticizing U.S. policies. In July 2025, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced sanctions against Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, under President Trump's Executive Order 14203. Albanese responded by likening the sanctions to mafia-style intimidation techniques. This unprecedented move of sanctioning a UN human rights official dealt a blow to U.S. global standing, but shows just how far the administration will go to silence criticism of Israeli actions. Trump is even using U.S. trade as a weapon to advance his pro-Israel policies. Canada faced tariffs after recognizing Palestinian statehood. Just think about that. We're punishing one of our closest allies, our neighbor, for recognizing Palestine's right to exist. Trump has essentially given Netanyahu not only a free hand in Gaza, the West Bank, and beyond, while increasing American military support and risking involving the United States in another war for Israel's benefit. The geopolitical costs of Trump's Israel-first policies to America's standing are steep, especially as China has risen to become a threat to the current order and U.S. dominance. Trump's endless concessions to Putin and unconditional support for Israeli atrocities erode U.S. credibility and alienate our allies. Domestically, censorship, persecution of Israel's critics, and corresponding university crackdowns undermine America's democratic values and are at least as dangerous as the woke authoritarianism that emerged from the radical left during the last decade. The broad support for Israeli actions from the Trump administration and from Congress as a whole has isolated the United States and increased China's soft power, especially in the global South, but also among segments of the population of traditional U.S. allies, which impacts the willingness of their political leaders to support the U.S. now and in the future. Let me be crystal clear. This isn't about anti-Semitism, Ukraine, or even about Palestinian statehood. It's about American sovereignty and vital American national interests. While U.S. foreign policy has been strongly influenced by the Israel lobby for decades, Trump appears to have dropped all pretenses, and it seems that the primary focus of the current administration is the realization of greater Israel at all costs. We may be witnessing something unprecedented in American history, an almost complete subordination of American foreign policy to another nation's territorial ambitions. The evidence is found in Trump's own words, in Netanyahu's victory laps, in the systematic suppression of dissent, and in the unusual concessions being offered to Putin, that without the context discussed here, would seem plain stupid. This administration has transformed the United States from a sovereign nation pursuing its own interests into little more than Israel's enforcement arm on the global stage. We're not just compromising our principles. We're abandoning our republic's founding ideal that America should be governed by Americans, for all Americans. The question is whether the voters and the leaders they elect can reclaim their sovereignty before the damage becomes irreversible. That's our show. Let us know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. Keep questioning. And remember, the official story is rarely the whole story. Like and subscribe for more analysis that cuts through the mainstream narrative. We'll see you next time.